Shukrana Guruji Maharaj for giving us this opportunity to read as well as listen to Shivpuran. Here is a synopsis from last week. Last week we read chapter 44 of Rudra Samhita section 5, where we read Andaka, who got distressed when his cousins questioned him of him claiming for the kingdom. Listening to that, he was very upset and he went to the forest and he performed penance for around 10,000 years, a very, very severe, difficult penance. And he started offering his body piece by piece to the sacred fire. And when the last, of him, when only bones and nerves were left, he was about to offer himself, the whole himself, where the gods got frightened and they propitiated Brahma and requested Brahma to help them and stop him. Brahma stopped him and Brahma asked him for a boon. He told Brahma that one of the things he wanted was divine vision because he was blind, and then he asked his cousin who questioned him should become his slaves. Then he also asked Brahma to make him live forever. Nobody should be able to kill him. So Brahma told him that he can grant all the boons except for the last one, because the one who takes birth has to die. But he can choose the way to die. So Brahma told him, and he asked that, okay, if he tries to possess a woman who's unapproachable to all men, probably then is when the death should befall upon him. Brahma granted that boon to him, and as soon as Brahma touched him, he became beautiful, beautiful body, very strong. But he got deluded with pride, getting all these powers, and he started conquering everyone. He made gods pay tribute to them, pay taxes to him, and roam around the entire universe, conquering everyone. He was associated with some of the demons, which made him destroy the Vedic rites as well, and he continued this for crores of years. Once he, with his ministers, when he went to the mountain of Mandara, his ministers saw Parvati, who was the most beautiful woman on the mountains, and they went to Andaka and described him the beauty of Parvati and described the features of Lord Shiva. They told him that, she's worthy enough to be fetched for himself. Listening to which, he sent his ministers to Lord Shiva, ordering him to surrender his wife. His ministers did the same. Lord Shiva dispatched them mockingly and sent them back. And his ministers, when they came back to Andaka, they told him everything that had happened, and then that Lord Shiva is not ready. He really got furious, and he started preparing himself for a fight with Lord Shiva. This is till where we read last time. Today we are going to read chapter 45. That's the beginning of war and the conversation with the messengers, and chapter 46, that's Andaka fights. Today we are only going to have our English reading, and that will be done by Urvashi Auntie. Before I leave, please, if you want to read Shivpuran, come forward. You can talk to Seema Auntie, Mansi Auntie, or myself. Thank you. Shukrana Guruji Maharaj.
Jai Guruji, Anantam Shukrana for this seva. Chapter 45. The beginning of the war and the conversation with the messengers. Sanat Kumara said, Andaka, the great Daitya king, deluded and smitten by Kama's arrows, drank wine and started from his palace. He walked like an elephant in rut. His eyes were roving. He was accompanied by many of his soldiers. He was fierce and walked majestically like heroes. He saw the cavern guarded by Viraka standing at the entrance. He exhibited the characteristic reactions of a moth approaching a lamp and glancing at it eagerly and lovingly. Already the burning fire of passion had scorched him, and therefore afflicting hits from Viraka had no effect on him. He was attacked with stones, trees, thunderbolts, water, fire, and serpents. He was threatened with weapons and missiles. He was afflicted by Viraka repeatedly, but ineffectively, and asked, Who are you? Why have you come here? On hearing his words, Andaka made no reply, but began to fight Viraka when, surprisingly and unbelievably, he was defeated by Viraka in the battle. When his sword was shattered to pieces, he fled from the battlefield, divested of his conceited pride. His throat was parched with hunger and thirst. He was aggrieved. Prahlada and other important Daityas then fought with Viraka. Though they were terrible themselves, they were defeated by hundreds of weapons. Finally, their minds were held in check by the goad of shame. Virochana, Bali, Bana, Sahasrabahu, Bhaji, Kujamba, Sambhara, Vratra, and others of great valor fought there. These were defeated by the Gana Viraka in the course of the battle and split into two. At the end of the fight, when many Danavas were killed, the Ganas of Siddhas shouted victory. When packs of jackals began to dance in the midst of the putrefying suits, fat and flesh, when beasts of prey, ghosts, and spirits began to roam in the terrible slough of slushy blood, when the Daityas were smashed thus, the trident-bearing Lord consoled Parvati and said, Shiva said, O beloved, formerly I had performed the great vrata called Mahapashupata. The strength that I derive therefrom is exhausted, whence this fall of the immortals at the hands of the mortals. O goddess, merit has declined due to the physical contact with you. I will create a wonderfully divine and terrible forest, and going there, I shall perform still more sphere vrata whereby, O beautiful lady, you shall be free from fear and sorrow. Sanat Kumara said, After saying this, the noble soul went to a holy and terrible forest. He proclaimed loudly his intention and performed penance highly illuminated. Shiva performed penance for 1,000 years, the like of which could not be performed by the gods or asuras. Parvati stayed behind in Mandara mountain, awaiting for the return of the Lord. The chaste lady, endowed with great conduct, remained alone in that cavern. She was terrified and distressed. Of course, she was guarded by her son Viraka. Then the Daitya, whose mental steadiness had been shattered by the arrows of Kama, became bold and haughty due to the boons that had been granted to him. He came to the cavern accompanied by his soldiers. Forsaking food, drink, and sleep, the infuriated Daitya, accompanied by his army, fought with Viraka, a very wonderful battle for 505 days and nights. Various weapons were used by the Daityas: swords, javelins, slings, maces, sharp missiles, arrows with crescent-shaped tips, arrows with prolonged iron pikes, tortoise-shaped heads with blazing steel pointed hooks, sharp spear axes, iron clubs of diverse sorts, iron balls, rocks, branches of trees, and various divine missiles. Viraka was attacked with these weapons and he fainted at the entrance to the cavern. His body was pierced by the sharp weapons hurled by the Daityas. The various weapons barred the entrance to the cave. Viraka was covered by the weapons and could not be extricated. The goddess Parvati was afraid at the sight. From within the cave, she remembered Brahma and Vishnu. Thus remembered by the goddess, Brahma, Vishnu, Indra, and others assumed female forms and came there. Sages of great dignity, Siddhas, Nagas, and Goyakas, became women and entered the cavern where Parvati was staying. Since it was not customary to enter the harem of kings, they assumed female form of wonderful features and entered the cavern of Parvati for heroic activities. Thundering sounds of clouds, as at the end of a kalpa, were produced by these thousands of women. Drums were beaten and conches were blown. Meanwhile, Viraka of wonderfully fierce valor regained his consciousness and stood up. He seized the weapons of the warriors and hit the Daityas with them. Brahmi stood opposed to the Daityas with the staff in her hand. Gauri became very furious. Narayani held conch, mace, sword, discus, and bow in her hands. Bidaujasi set out holding the thunderbolt and the handle of the plowshare in her hand. Her complexion was golden, the sky constituted her forelocks. In her fierce velocity, thousands of streams of current were let loose. The goddess of thousand eyes fought steadily in war, undaunted and invincible with hundreds of daityas. The goddess of fire was of none too gentle face, and Yamya was fierce with staff in her lifted hands. Narati held a fierce bow and a sharp sword in her lifted hands. The female form of Varuna set out for fight with noose in her hands. The female form of fierce storm took up hunger for her physical body and held gold in her hand. The female form of Kubera held a mace in her hand, blazing like the fire at the end of a kalpa. The female form of the lord of Yakshas was sharp-faced and hideous. The female form of Naga was terrible with claws for her weapons. These and hundreds of other goddesses set out for the battleground. On seeing this limitless, vast army, the Daityas were bewildered, pale in the face, excited and dismayed, frightened and dejected in the heart. All these celestial damsels, the chief of whom was Brahma Shakti and the general Viraka of terrible valor, pacified the mind of Parvati, the daughter of the Lord of Mountains, and assured her. The important ones among the Daityas and others who possessed strength derived from the boons granted to them, thought in their minds of their death or retreat, and fought an unprecedented great battle with the ladies. Making Viraka of terrible valor and wonderful intellect her general, Parvati fought a wonderful battle in the company of her friends and allies. Thinking upon Vishnu and looking towards the southern direction, the Daitya king, the heroic son of Hiranyaksha, quickly made a fierce array of soldiers with the Gila at the head. He made the frontal array terrific by the force of regular service. By the time this was done, the infuriated lord came there. Clad in hides, he had the lustre of 1,000 fiery suns at the end of a kalpa. On seeing Lord Shiva arrived after the lapse of 1,000 years, the delighted women in the company of Viraka fought a very great battle. Parvati bowed her head to Shiva. She exhibited great valor to her lord. The delighted Parvati fought a terrific battle. Shiva embraced her and then entered the cavern. The numerous women that had gathered were dismissed. Parvati honored Viraka by hundreds of gifts and appointed him as the keeper of the gate. Then the Asura chief, very clever in statesmanship, unable to see either Parvati or Shiva, sent his emissary Bigasa immediately to Shiva. He was one whose limbs were shattered by the weapons hurled by the gods and the Ganas. He entered the cavern, bowed to Shiva, and spoke these words haughtily. The messenger said, I have been sent by him, and so I have entered this cavern. You have nothing to do with the woman. Surrender this young and beautiful lady. Usually you are an ascetic. Carry on that. Thinking, should a sage be offended? I have observed forbearance within my tender mind. But, O sage, you are not a real ascetic, but only my enemy. You are extremely inimical to the Daityas. Show your might in fighting with me. O wicked ascetic, I shall send you to Yama's abode, befitting the nether worlds. Sanat Kumara said, on hearing these words conveyed by the emissary, the great three-eyed lord, the goal of the good, the destroyer of the pride of the wicked, the wearer of skull garlands, spoke furiously, burning with grief. Shiva said, manifestly your words are fierce, hence hasten, fight with me if you have the might. Of what avail are the wives and riches, be they ever be so beautiful, to a feeble man in the world? Let the haughty Daityas, proud of their strength, come. I have already thought of this and acted accordingly. How can a feeble man maintain even his physical body? Let them do whatever they are ordained to do. I shall also do whatever I have to do. There is no doubt in this. Chapter 46, Andhaka Fights. Sanat Kumara said, "The king of Daityas, skilled in interpreting what he hinted at, seized his mace and hastened along with his army to the entrance of the cavern. The terrible demon Gila, who could not be overwhelmed even by the foremost among the gods, was placed ahead. After reaching the cavern of the Lord Shiva, the Daitya attacked with his weapons as refulgent as thunderbolt. The others showered weapons on Viraka, and yet others on Parvati, the daughter of the mountain. Some smashed the beautiful entrance, some destroyed the flowers, leaves, fruits, and roots, the hearty water sheds, and the garden paths. A few stirred up joyously the sunny peaks of the mountain. Then Shiva collected his army. The infuriated trident bearing deity called them together, the terrible living beings, the gods, with their armies, including Vishnu and others. Immediately after being called, the gods came to Shiva and stood near him with palms joined in reverence. They came with chariots, elephants, horses, bulls, cows, camels, mules, excellent birds, lions, bhutas, tigers, deer, boars, sarasa birds, fishes, crocodiles, other living beings, scattered flies, serpents, rending cremation grounds, along with ghosts and spirits, divine chariots, lakes, rivers, and mountains. When the gods had taken adequate rest along with their vehicles, the trident bearing Lord Shiva sent them to the battleground with a steady and chief resolve on victory. They fought with the army of the Lord of Daityas, including Gila, terribly and unrestrainedly, as if the end of yugas had come, but they were all devoured in the battlefield angrily. In a trice, all of them, including Brahma, Indra, Vishnu, the sun, and the moon, were swallowed by Bigasa. When the armies were devoured, only Viraka was left behind. Leaving off the battlefront, Viraka entered the cavern, bowed to Shiva. The eloquent but distressed Viraka then acquainted the destroyer of Kama with all the details. O Lord, your army has been devoured by the Daitya Vigasa, Vishnu, the preceptor and the elder to the three worlds, and the destroyer of Daityas has been devoured. The moon and the sun, Brahma and Indra, the bestowers of boons, have been devoured. All these Yama, Varuna, Vayu, and Kubera have been devoured. I, the humble one, alone am left behind. What is it that I have to do now? The Lord of Daityas, along with the Daityas, is invincible and hence rejoiced. Vishnu, the Lord who became invincible after tearing off Hiranyakashipu, the son of Kashyapa, with his claws, had the speed of wind and a terrifying demeanor. He opened his mouth wide and began to blow off the three worlds, although the Lord was subservient to the good. When the matter stood thus, he was cursed by the seven sages, the virtual lords of the worlds. You will be crushed by the Daityas for a long time. Then they were requested by Vishnu through loving words conducive to his benefit. O great sages, when will I get rid of this terrible curse? Thereupon the infuriated sages said, At the time of war you will be hit with fists and struck with terrible arrows. When swallowed by Bigasa with wide open mouth, you shall stabilize yourself in the Badri forest, in the holy residence of Shiva, the cavern, and shall then be freed from sins. Thereafter, in accordance with the curse of the sages, he roams every day in the battleground, very hungry, and swallows the Daityas and becomes delighted. By using the science of reviving the dead to life and chanting verses of hymns, Shukra revives the Daityas killed by the gods with full vigor and joy and cures them of their hundreds of wounds. It would rather be better to give upon lives at the battle than yield. You, the witness of everything, have been chosen by us as the guide in the accomplishment of our task. Sanat Kumara said. On hearing this from his excellent son, the Lord of Pramathas, the Lord of the three worlds, meditated for a long time. He performed an incomparable miracle by chanting Saman songs. He laughed, assuming a body as resplendent as the sun, and thereby dispelled the darkness. When the light spread, the sage Viraka fought again with the Daityas of deformed features. He who was created by the excellent sage after swallowing powdered rock and who had fought the battle and even conquered the Pura Asura previously was immediately swallowed by the Daitya together with Nandin, who carried sharp arrows, spear, and swords, who was the chief of warriors and hundreds of excellent sages, the great receptacle of lords, possessed of mental and physical restraint and great courage. On seeing this, Lord Shiva got onto his bull and faced the Daitya Vigasa. Repeating the divine mantra that compels the disgorging of what is swallowed, he stood there keeping the bow in readiness and the arrows as powerful as thunderbolts. Then the sage Viraka came out of the mouth of Vigasa, accompanied by Vishnu and his army. The lotus born Brahma, Indra, the enemy of Bala, the moon, and the sun were also disgorged. Thus disgorged, the delighted army fought a great battle again. Thus the army of the Daityas was conquered. But Shukra revived the Daityas slain in the battle by the virtue of his science. The preceptor of Danavas was then bound like an animal and brought by the Ganas before Lord Shiva, the destroyer of Tripuras, who swallowed him. When Shukra was no more, the entire residence of the Danavas was shattered and destroyed. Everything was suppressed by the gods. When the battleground was strewn with plenty of bhutas who eagerly devoured mouthfuls of the corpses of the Daityas, with headless trunks dancing, holding sharp arrows and spears in their hands, with intoxicated vatalas, with birds of firm claws and beaks, and with wolves, their jaws filled with dead bodies, the founder of the family, Hiranyakashipu, fought the battle for a long time and was defeated by Vishnu, Shiva, and Indra. When the exhausted army entered the netherworlds, nooks and corners in hills and seas, Andaka, the foremost of the Daityas, who in his height of fury had harassed the gods and who could split the universe, was divested of his haughtiness by Vishnu, by terrible blows from his mace. Since he had secured boons, he did not leave the battleground. Although his body had been afflicted much by the Lord of the gods, by terrible blows and hits, then by means of weapons and missiles, trees, mountains, and waters, he defeated the gods. Then he challenged the Lord of the Pramathas, roaring loudly. Fighting steadily by means of various weapons that fell on the battleground, they were exhausted. Then the Asura inflicted pain on Parvati and Shiva by means of uprooted trees, serpents, thunderbolts, and other weapons, and by indulging in deceptive practices. In order to conquer Shiva, the Daitya of as great strength and intelligence as the destroyer of Tripuras created another juggler, a cheat. The Daitya, whose madness had helplessly been aggravated by hundreds of boons, could not be killed by the gods, though his body had been shattered by plenty of weapons and missiles. Many Antakas, originating from the exudations of his body, with hideous faces resembling his, pervaded the surface of the earth. He was terribly pierced with the trident by Shiva, the enemy of the Tripuras, the lord of Bhutas, whose body blazed like fire at the end of a kalpa. When fresh army cropped up from the army slain by Shiva, from the hot drops of blood and cut pieces of flesh from the wounds of those killed, Vishnu called away the lord of Pramathas and intelligently assumed a fierce form of a hideous woman, employing his yogic knowledge. It had a very terrible and hard aspect, characterized by several arms. Angrily, the Lord Vishnu projected from the wings of the army and stood ahead of the Ganas. The goddess stood high in the battlefield, covering up the entire ground by her pair of feet. She was eulogized by the gods. Induced by the Lord, the hungry female form devoured the army, drank the hot blood of the Daityas, and made the battleground marshy. Then only the chief of the Daityas was left. Still he fought on with Shiva, beating terribly with his palms, knees, legs, nails, face, arms, and head, Although his blood had been sucked dry, he remembered the traditional heroism of his race. Afterwards, he was quietened by the Lord of Pramathas. His heart was pierced. He was staked to the trident. He was held aloft in the sky like a long pole. Half of his body, the lower one, was dried up by the rays of the sun. The other half was drenched by clouds, attended with gusts of wind and heavy downpour. His body was subjected to all sorts of torture. Shattered and scattered like flakes of snow in the rays of the sun, his limbs were torn asunder. Yet the foremost of the Daityas did not die. He eulogized Shiva. The delighted Shiva, ocean of great mercy, joyously gave him the position of the chieftain of his Ganas. The lords of the worlds worshipped the Lord of the Pramathas at the end of war with different hymns pleasing and significant. Vishnu, Brahma, and others too eulogized him with stooping shoulders. They were delighted and happy and shouted cries of victory. Shiva spent the time rejoicingly in the mountain cavern in their company. Honoring the great and excellent mountains by the bestowal of gifts, he dismissed a few of his ashmas, paths, regaining the delighted daughter of the Lord of Mountains and the sinless son from the terrible jaw of Vigasa he sported. With this, I conclude chapter 46 and today's reading. Thank you. Jai Guruji.